Hello, I'm Terence Watts. I've been involved in the world of personal therapy for almost 30 years, and in this short video I'm going to tell you about BWRT, the most amazingly successful therapy I've ever encountered in all that time. BWRT stands for Brain Working Recursive Therapy. It's a way of working that allows a professionally trained therapist to get surprisingly quick and effective results with all manner of problems and issues. Of course, since I was the one who created it, it's probably obvious that I'm going to sing its praises, but it's not just me. Every therapist who trains in it says the same thing. Essentially, BWRT is a form of psychotherapy, but it's psychotherapy like no other, because it drastically reduces the number of sessions needed for the vast majority of issues. It's not at all unusual for just a single session to fix even long-standing conditions. I'll tell you more about that later, but first I want to explain a little about where it came from and how it works. It originated on a rainy afternoon early in 2011. I was having a late lunch and idly scanning through the pages of a science magazine when I read about an experiment that had been conducted in 1983. A scientist called Benjamin Libet had discovered something rather peculiar and certainly very interesting, and that is that we start to respond to anything that happens around us about half a second before we know what we're doing. There's actually nothing mysterious about this, even if it sounds a bit like it at first. There's no indication of anything being preordained, spooky or spiritual. It's all to do with biology. You see, the brain runs on a type of electricity, but it's not like the speedy stuff you find in your house wiring. It's about 3 million times slower than that. Even at its fastest, it travels at only about 360 kilometers an hour. That's about 100 meters a second, which still sounds pretty quick, until you realize how far it has to travel. Now, the first part of the brain, the bit that experiences everything before it gets anywhere else, has no conscious awareness. No awareness of anything happening inside it at all. It's just a data collector. It's the part you could call the subconscious, and it's a kind of pattern matching matrix that tests everything to see if it's been encountered before, and if so, matches it to a relevant behavior pattern. So you don't notice those electrical pulses until they reach the part of the brain that does have awareness. But that's around 50 meters of neural pathways later on. Half a second, in other words. What this all means is that when the brain encounters a pattern it's familiar with, it immediately starts to do what it's always done when it's found that same pattern. And the pattern itself will be something taken on board because it seemed important at the time. This is why you simply cannot stop yourself trying to catch something if you drop it, or why you might sometimes say something you really can't believe you said. And the thing is, even if you manage to change your mind, that decision will also have been taken a half a second before you're aware of it. And what that all means is that we really don't have free will in the way we usually think of it. It's quite mind-boggling. And this is why it's so difficult to control anxiety or panic, for example. The early part of the brain is doing something automatically. Only this time it's responding to a pattern that used to mean there was a threat of some sort. That might be something that was learnt in a split second of trauma and has been consciously forgotten, or it might be something that's repeated, practiced if you like, over and over again, something you just couldn't deal with without a flood of anxiety. The important thing is that there's no judgment in that part of the brain. It simply doesn't know if the threat is no longer valid, so it kicks off. And during that half second before it hits awareness, a cascade of events races through your body to instantaneously fire up all the emergency systems. By the time you know about it, the whole alarm system, the fight or flight response as it's known, is in full flood. It's no wonder you can't just pull yourself together, as others might have suggested you should. This process of activity going on in the early part of the brain before we know about it was what Mr. Libet had discovered with his experiments. His test subjects were wired up to a scanner and asked to move their hand at random and to tell him what number on a dial a moving dot was on at the moment they made their decision. He was astonished to be able to accurately forecast the movement before it was made and before they told him what their number was. Now, I'd read about this before. I'd always been fascinated by it. But this time was different. This time, it grabbed at my imagination and what felt like 1,000 ideas exploded in my head all at once. I suddenly knew beyond doubt that I could create a therapy that worked in that half second between a reaction starting and the conscious mind becoming aware of it. Not only that, I realised all at once I knew how to stop a troublesome thought in its tracks, to actually stop it getting to that conscious part of the brain. And I knew that I could stop it for long enough to make whatever changes were needed to diffuse it forever, to stop it from triggering whatever symptoms it had been creating. Even better, the client wouldn't have to tell me what they were experiencing. As long as they knew what they wanted to feel instead, the therapy would work. Within a few days, I'd carried out the first experiments of my own, using just the very basic ideas that had flooded into my mind during those exciting moments. And I soon discovered two important facts. I was definitely onto something, and there was a lot of work to do before it could come anywhere close to being called a therapy. From then on, for the next 18 months, it filled every waking moment as I tried one idea after another, everything gradually taking shape and almost defining itself into a structured model that I was confident enough to teach. And so it was that in October 2013 I taught it to a group of therapists for the very first time. Among those first students was an eminent South African clinical psychologist by the name of Rafik Lockhart, who ran a mental health clinic in a hospital in Cape Town. He was immediately impressed by it, and because he had the facilities and resources to test this new therapy even more exhaustively than I had done so far, he soon became my research partner. What we discovered between us was that panic attacks, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, even the aftermath of profound and prolonged sexual abuse could all be helped more effectively and speedily than ever before. So effective is BWRT that Mr. Lockhart now uses no other therapy in his hospital clinic, and the model has now been developed to a high enough level that it can work with almost anything. Depression, addiction, obsessive compulsive disorder, alcoholism, suicidal thoughts, even suicidal intent. All these can now be helped far more easily than most therapists and psychologists would ever have thought possible. BWRT is effective, speedy, long-lasting, totally safe and has no unpleasant side effects. And if you want to find out more, you can visit our website at www.bwrt.org. I'm Terence Watts, and I'll tell you more about brain working recursive therapy in another video. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.